What's that?
Is Jennifer participating? Anyone know? She's not. Is Mike here?
Not yet. I know he left here a little while ago to go log in at home, so he should be logging in.
Okay.
Brian, do you want me to try to get a hold of Mike? Or is that what you're doing? I can't hear you.
Yes, I was going to send him a text to see if he's here shortly, or if he's want us to go ahead and start, or what's
Okay.
going on. Okay. Looks like he's here.
Hello,
Hey, what's going on, Mike?
good evening.
Okay.
I noticed that there's a public participation email. Is
Those
that-
are for our regular meetings, not for,
Okay, it looked like it came in just before this meeting, so I thought maybe it was related.
I actually, oops, sorry. I actually just opened it and I was going to forward it so that somebody could follow up with this person, but we have two separate forms, so I mean, it's not one of the committee participation form submissions.
I will follow up. I'm not, did they write anything? Did you see, or,
No, that's why I was gonna forward it so that somebody could follow up with them.
okay, I'll do that.
Okay,
Okay. Well, it looks like everybody's here. I want to welcome everyone to the June 15th, 2021 Finance and Facilities Committee meeting. The board members present are Matt Campbell, Burl Piccolantonio, Daphne Morning, and myself, Brian Hairston. And I guess we'll get started with Mike Berlingo, if you want to start with the May financials and bring us up to date where we are.
Okay. Let me try to share. All right, can everyone see that? Okay, so we can review the May financials. There were very few minor variances between the estimates for May and the actual. So revenues were just about exactly as estimated. Expenditures were also in line. I mean, given that we're this far into the year, there's not a material change to the year-to-date variances that we've talked about for the last several months. So revenues continue to exceed estimates in the operating area. We also have additional state foundation funding that was restored, which was not expected to be restored this fiscal year. So overall, operating revenues are up $4.4 million. There was that $2 million increase due to the premium on sale of bonds and COPs, but that's offset by an increase in expenditures. On the expenditure side, again, salaries and wages are tracking fairly close to estimates. Benefits remain under due to the lower, as we've talked about for several months, increase in premiums. Purchase services and materials and supplies, we should see those numbers get a little closer to estimates as we close out this fiscal year, and make sure that all invoices for things receipted are processed and paid to the best extent we can. So some of those encumbrances will carry over into the next fiscal year But right now we're working feverishly to, close out. And when I run through the list of activities, just to identify some of the things we do in order to close out the year and get the results more in line with actuals, and clean up any activity that does not need to move into the next fiscal year. So again, we're doing, better than planned, and that will continue at the end of the year. We do project we will be better than planned.
Mike, can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
Please. Can you discuss the 3 million advance in the May actual?
Yes. So each year, the board has set a cash reserve policy at 60 days operating cash on hand. Each year in the forecast, we are building that reserve. So for this fiscal year, we added an additional 3 million as forecasted. So that brings our reserve balance up to 5 million. It'll be at the end of June. Our reserve will sit at 5 million. That will continue to build each year throughout the forecast period until we reach eventually the 60 days cash on hand.
But where did it transfer in from?
It actually comes from the general fund. So if you look,
It's all general
transfer
fund,
in,
so I don't get it.
yeah, so it's money that's in the general fund, and we are moving it to a reserve within the general fund. So the advance in or transfer in is 3 million, and then down below you can see a transfer out of 3 million. The way the accounting system works, when you move from one fund into a special cost center within the fund, you need to actually transfer the money. So it shows up as a receipt and disbursement, even though there was no actual impact on cash.
Okay, so I get that now. So we have the inflow of 3 million and the outflow.
And the outflow of 3 million. So 0 impact on cash, but it moves the money from general fund with no restrictions into general fund cash reserve account.
Okay, so then help me with the operational fees. What is that? The 6th line down and expenditures?
The 2 million, the 1.9 million being over,
Yeah,
that relates to the premium on the sale of bonds and COPS. So this 2,081,000 premium, we had an offsetting expenditure in the operational fee line. So the premium was receipted into the general fund, and then it was expended out of the general fund.
okay.
So again, no impact on cash, but it was a receipt in and out.
So over and above the 1.9 million, what is normally in that operational fee line? Because that's not a normal and customary line item that I'm used to seeing.
Yeah, operational fees are mostly for auditor-related expenses. One of the largest items in that would be fees we pay for the county auditor for collection of taxes.
And that is $1.2 million?
No, there are other items in that category. Just trying to think if I have a detailed sheet here that I can review. Yeah, I don't seem to have the detail with me.
Is that something you can give us the
Yes.
detail on? Because I mean, I'm not even, where's that line on the 5-year forecast? Do you know the line number?
It's the 800.
There is no 800 on the 5-year forecast.
My forecast.
I was going to ask basically, how are you tracking that too over the years? If, if you have like all these items that are included in that number, and when you are doing, like Daphne said, the 5-year forecast, how are you tracking those particular items, line items?
Well, they would also be, because they recur each year, auditor fee collections and other things that are in there, like audit fees paid to the actual auditors to audit our statements, fees paid to the accounting firm to compile statements, things of that nature that are in there. And those are recurring. We do budget for those each year.
It's not something you have to answer now. I just would be interested in the detail supporting that line.
Okay, I will forward that.
Thank you.
So year-to-date activity, local percent of operating income at about 79%. That's pretty much in line with where it'll be at end of year, somewhere in the 78, 79% range. State sources at about 20, 21%. And that's consistent with, the trend is consistent with what's been happening the last several years. So and then on the non-operational, again, here's the premium on sale of bonds that was receipted to transfer in for that 3 million for the reserve. It inflates our actual revenues and expenditures, but it's the way the accounting system works with fund accounting to move dollars, where you need to effectively make a transfer, which inflates the numbers. So right now, year to date, 15.8 million positive net cash flow from operations. That will decrease significantly because estimated revenues for the month of June are 1.3, 1.4 million versus 9 to 10 million of expenditures that will occur. We receive the largest receipts when taxes are collected in the July, August timeframe, and or January, February, March timeframe. Bank reconciliation, we have roughly $17 million in cash. The bulk of that is sitting in investments, all related to construction, and or 5.7 in Star, Ohio as temporary cash holdings, Heartland Bank money market account, U.S. bank investments. Those are more CDs and agency funds and those type of things. The 4.6 million in Red Tree will all be used up as we finish out the Lincoln project. So that number will be depleted within the next 60 days at most.
I do have a question as you're going through here on the meter. Go ahead. Further down.
Okay. This is the detail that backs up the meter investments. So you can see we have money in Star, Ohio through meter, and the 80,000 is sitting in a cash fund. We have a number of agency bonds with various bureaus like Federal Home Loan Bank, those type of things. These are standard vehicles that we are allowed to invest in that are backed by the federal government. Commercial paper, so Credit Suisse, Toyota Motor, Taxis, Credit Agricole. These are all highest rated paper that you can buy. We're restricted to only buy commercial paper of the highest grade so that there's little to no risk of default.
Mike, this is where my question is. It appears to me that we keep around, in the commercial paper, all other investments are in the 1% to 2% range, right? But we've got this 6.19 in the Texas, whatever that is. Did you look at that company? I mean, is that where we should have the bulk of our commercial paper? I don't know that company. I haven't researched it. I was just curious whether the broker had a reason for having double investment penetration in that particular commercial paper.
Yeah, so that was invested back in April, the 1.447 million. The way commercial paper works, I can't say Texas is not a household name. So like Toyota Motor Credit and Credit Suisse are companies that many would recognize. There are other names out there that JP Morgan and other banks and financial institutions that issue paper. The problem has been that the amount of paper available has been less. So when you're going to market, many times when they're issuing paper, it's hard to actually get it when it's being offered because there's a demand. The rates are down significantly from what they used to be. There's a max of investment up to 270 days with commercial paper. So you cannot invest long-term. So sometimes the names you'll see are not necessarily household names, but they are of the highest quality. And the way commercial paper works is you buy it at a discount. So the cost paid on this would have been the 1,447,000, and the interest accrues up until the maturity date. So at any time, if you choose to sell commercial paper, you will never incur a loss because you're accreting interest each day or month. So that if we turned around and said, well, we're going to sell that paper, we would, we can reinvest it in something else.
I don't know. I would just be interested in our broker's reasoning by having that concentration in Natixis. You know, it looks to me like it's a French corporate and investment bank. Yeah. So not only do we have a concentration in it, but it appears to have, unless it's been arbitrage, currency risk, right? And where are the investments?
Yeah, it's not actually invested in France. It would be the US operation of bank or investment company.
Okay.
Just like Toyota Motor Credit, Toyota is a Japanese company, but they have significant operations here in the US and corporations in the US.
Okay.
I will get more info on that also. And again, there's a number of certificates of deposits that have been invested for. Rates are, on newer issues here are relatively low. On the older issues, we're still at 3%, 2.6, 2.6, 2.8. So those are yielding fairly high amounts compared to what you can get in the market today. So the summary of all cash and investments in terms of maturity dates, this just lays out what we're yielding within each of the accounts on average. Heartland is now down to 6 basis points. That recently dropped from the 14 that they were paying us. So I will be moving a bulk of that to other investments since I can gain more yield even if it's in commercial paper or some other vehicle. We are limited to in commercial paper also. It cannot be higher than, I believe, 40% of your investable assets, because they don't want any particular entity over leveraged in one area. And commercial paper does carry slightly more risk than, say, a government bond.
Okay. I mean, can I just ask a question? I mean, because I'm not fully, I'm naive or I don't understand, but I know when I was with the city, a lot of their investments, especially when you had a lot of cash on hand, they were doing repurchase money agreements, when they were taking that cash and putting it in and working it over like a 3-day weekend period or stuff like that. I don't know if those type of investments are not, the schools do that type of thing, or it's just city type of things. Because they would say, have $1 million cash on hand, we're going to do a repurchase agreement, or 3-day repurchase agreement over the weekend, and then you get an extra day because of the holiday. And then
I'm not too familiar with the repurchase agreements, and I'd need to check our policy. I don't know if we allow investments in repurchase agreements. So I do need to refer to the policy first. And then if it's allowed, then I can certainly investigate it.
Like say the city of Gahanna was doing it when I worked for them. They were doing the repurchase agreements, especially when they had cash on hand, or like let's say if they were sending out payments to vendors or things of that nature, maybe that money, because of the weekend and whatever the case is, they would invest that money over the weekend till the checks hit, whatever the case is, and then they will release the funds, and they would have that money overnight or over those 2 or 3 days where the bank utilizes that money to invest, and then we would get interest from that over a 2-day period or whatever the case is, 2-3-day period. So I was just asking because I don't know.
I'll investigate them. It's not something I've invested in the past. So I would need to do a little research. But certainly might be worthwhile if it's a safe investment that we're allowed to do. So here we have all the construction funds, which are the bulk of the cash, the COPS and the bond issue and the capitalized interest, all yielding in the 0.220 to 27, 24 basis points. Again, the yield is just not there the way it was. For example, when we had the 2018 bonds and invested those, we brought in about 1.4 million of interest earnings on the 32 million of those construction bonds. The expected interest on the COPS and the CD and the bonds here, we're looking at about 1.3 to 1.7 million. Rates have dropped that dramatically. It is due to the inflation that's picked up in the last few months. And if the inflation continues, it's likely that I think rates will be rising in the near term. So we would be able to pick up some additional yield as the rates increase. And I think it's more likely than not that rates will need to increase if inflation stays on its current path. So keeping the money short term as opposed to locking in a long-term investment, I'm leery to take some of the funds that are in, say, the money market. If I can put some in commercial paper for shorter terms, if rates rise, we can then get more yield by locking in then maybe 2 to 3 year terms. If I do it today and yields or interest rates rise, then the value of the investment drops. It's an inverse relationship. So as interest rates go up, your fixed income investment decreases in value, and we'd be sitting in loss positions on most all those investments. which would make it difficult to sell in the future. Any other questions on?
No, just with all that money, we're going to be watching the Fed meeting on Thursday pretty closely, aren't we?
Yeah, the Fed meetings are eventful these days. And the markets move dramatically on every little word.
Was there anything more that you want to speak to regarding the bonds and cops issue?
Okay, so on the bonds and cops, as you know, stop share here. So as you know, we borrowed the 250 million on a tax exempt basis, and that requires us to meet a certain schedule of expenditures. One, in terms of encumbrances, and then two, in terms of actual expenditures. So we have a meeting that is going to be held in the next, Steve, I'm not certain that we don't have a date at this point, but Chris McCloskey with Bricker is setting up a meeting with our architects, our construction firm, and other people in the organization, myself, Steve, and looking at where we are in relation to the current draw schedule, because it's been a slightly slow start in terms of spending. Our spending to date is about 2 million against the proceeds, and that needs to, at least using one of the methodologies to meet the tax exempt status for the bond issue, we would need to spend 25 million in year one, or 85% within the first 3 years. So, the original goal and the draw schedule indicated that we would be able to meet those spending targets. So just to stay on track, we need to just meet on a regular basis, I think, to look at where we are in the design phase and what activities we could do in terms of just raising of properties that we have, abatement, raising the current Lincoln Elementary that needs to be torn down, those type of activities that we can start relatively quickly.
Yeah, Mike, could I interject something?
Yes,
So
yes.
I reached out to Chris McCloskey at Bricker and Eckler, and I suggested that we have a regular draw schedule meeting, and just to keep on track, as Mike suggested. And there are ways to make adjustments along the way. So yes, it's the 10% or 25 million that Mike talked about, but some of that can be encumbrances in the first year. So we're just gonna, continue to kind of monitor that. I know, Mike wants to be comfortable with the draw schedule. So do I. We had some, tough decisions to make about tax exempt or, maybe going in another directions with the bonds. And certainly they worked hard on the draw schedule. And so we just need to kind of, there are options that we can do. We can do early site packages for things and, excuse me, to ramp up the draw schedule. So we just got to be smart about it. And we just got to set up regular meetings so that we can keep on track, and Mike's informed about it so he feels comfortable. Right, Mike?
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay.
And then,
Looks like, are you done, Mike?
yeah, and then lastly, just in terms of the end of year financial meeting, just to kind of review activities and things that we need to process for the close. Need to find my.
Hey, Mike, while
Yes.
you're looking for that, can I talk about gap filling and the things we're looking at using ESSER funds for? We've
Certainly.
been working on, as you're looking for that, just to save time. So we're getting ESSER funds, as everyone knows. And so we've been working with our principals, our curriculum team, and our district administrative team to look at different positions and defining them. And so we're going to put under consideration math support K-8. We have lots of reading support, but not enough math support. And we know kids, there will be gaps in their learning in math. And so we want to put some things into place, some intervention for kids. And we are considering creating positions that we would hire through the ESC to do this support. Also upper elementary literacy support. So that's grades 3 through 5, mental health support, K to 12. And then we want to have some support in behaviors and restorative practices. So that's 6 through 12. And then multi-tiered systems of support. K-12, things like 504, students on 504 plans, special education plans, but also kids that haven't been identified. So those are the areas we're looking at bringing on help. We know that as we begin next year, there'll be gaps. And we're also looking at some mental health support as well, because we know that there'll be some needs to help kids with their anxiety and depression. We know the pandemic caused a lot of isolation. And so we're also making considerations along those lines. So I just wanted to kind of update you. We had a meeting last week to talk about these things and define these positions, and we'll update you as we learn more.
Steve, we saw an article that ESSER funds can be used for capital projects due to the impact of the pandemic on supply and demand.
Yeah.
Are we considering that as well?
We've talked a little bit about it. We haven't talked about it in depth, but we should, because I think that's an avenue we may want to explore. We are putting in an HVAC system, for instance, at Royal Manor this summer, right? And I know that's one of the things that you can use funds for. I'm not sure, one of the things we talked about, a while back was trying to kind of frame out an entrance to the property that was donated to us by Tom and Ellen Tripp, so that we can begin to use that facility. Right now, it borders on the High Point property, but right now there's a lot of brush and you really have to kind of climb over things to get there. So could we make a gate and an entrance? And I know as part of our agreement with the Tripps, it was to name it after them. And so thinking along those lines as well. So I think, Mike, we should have a discussion about that as we look at our ESSER funds. Can we use them for projects? Certainly HVAC might be something, Mike, that we can look into.
Yes.
I would encourage you to even think about the phase 2 projects.
Okay.
My concern with the mental health is we struggle to find people to fill those positions and time for them to interact with the students, right?
Yeah.
So there's an inherent cap on the ability to execute.
Yes.
And above what we've already invested.
Yeah. And I want to just be really clear. It's really going to be hard to find all these positions I just named off, right? So I think what you're getting at, Daphne, is if we can't fill these positions and make them robust and add value, then we have to look at these funds in a different way and pivot to something else, is I think what you're getting at, right?
That's
so
right.
Yeah. So Mike, I think that's, something we need to have, ready to go, because I think it is going to be tough. It'd be great if we could get 10 intervention math positions, but, there's a demand for teachers that, right now that exceeds supply. So it may be tough.
And are these 1-year positions? I mean, this isn't something we're going to be able to absorb going forward. So how are we?
Yeah, the way we
Selling
talked
this.
about it was 1 to 3 years, but if you go through the ESC, it's essentially 1 year, right? But we think we can fund it with ESSER funds for up to 3 years, but essentially the contract is for 1 year.
Yeah, I think that article also was talking about like dealing with like construction costs, where you're talking about lumber prices, steel prices, things of that nature. And,
Yeah.
and like if we're actually trying to go through this particular phase, building phases with the bonds and stuff like that, and you know, you're constantly, or we're constantly addressing the fact that the cost of materials is just skyrocketing.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't know, you know, if we would be more just management wise before we would actually have to go back and say, well, we don't have enough money to finish this because we're over budget because of the
Yeah.
material costs. You know,
Yeah.
I think that, you know, some consideration should be given there versus, you know, not saying that we don't need the teachers in the buildings, but I think it should be a balance where, like you're saying, if you're looking at a 1 year process or 1 to 3 years for these particular aides or mental health professionals, things of that nature, I think it might need to be some kind of balance to where
Yeah.
we don't want to go back and say, well, we're over budget because lumber, steel prices are, you know, outrageous.
Yeah. To your point, Brian, a 2x4 last summer, I think, was between $2.50 and $3. And right now they're $10, which is a significant increase. You know, in talking to our builders, Rosilli Construction, there's not going to be a lot of wood on the project. Even the studs they use are steel, but there is a supply chain issue with steel, structural steel. And so I think, you know, we need to have a plan A, a plan B, and I think you guys, you know, are, you know, right on the money when you say we need to kind of maybe have a balance, because we also have to measure, if we are able to hire these positions, are they working? You know, is it actually helping kids in the way that we want it to? And if it's not, then we need to be able to pivot with these funds.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Mike. I know you were going to pull something up. Thanks for
Yeah,
letting me
it's okay.
interject that.
So I just did a quick outline of, you know, the process and activities we go through at year end in order to close out the activity. So as you know, there's purchase orders that are put in place that are blankets that cover periods of time. So then others that are short-term in nature. All of those need to be reviewed, adjusted, and or closed for things where, you know, maybe we received the items, but we're not receiving the full amount of the order, or decided to take less, whatever it is. Those all need to be adjusted. We have a new system, and my understanding is it's not as easy to close out activity as it has been in the past due to changes in the process and the system. But we're working through that. All of the funds need to be reviewed. The grants, food service, debt service, PI, construction, et cetera, making sure that the encumbrances, the receipts, estimated receipts, and all of those items are adjusted and corrected, and that we make sure we're within appropriations and or adjust the appropriations as necessary. We will process any transfers and advances that'll be needed. There will be advances needed maybe for certain funds where, you know, we're short because money is to be collected next year, but those advances are returned to the general fund in July. To the extent we do a transfer, for example, for termination cost, that we do expect to make an additional transfer this month. So true up of actual to estimated resources. As you know, the auditor requires us to estimate our resources on an annual basis in the various funds. We then true up to the actual. So we'll be cutting off activity here shortly. Our last check run will be this week. we'll have a good handle on the actual resources next. And again, adjust appropriations as needed, and then temporary appropriations. So temporaries are to carry us through because effective July 1, our current appropriations expire. So we need to issue temporaries so that we can operate beginning in July. And those will be set and approved at the meeting. So just a quick explanation of what transfers and advances. Transfers are permanent movement of amounts between funds to offset deficits or record adjustments, whereas advances are temporary in nature. So anytime we have a shortfall due to a receipt that's going to be received in the future, we would advance money. This is typically done with grants, or could be done with something like food service if there was a shortfall, and then we can recapture the money the following year. Food service is a unique animal this year, and I'll talk a little bit about that. We initially anticipated a larger deficit in food service, but due to the change in government funding, we did receive significantly more government funds related to the food that we did prepare, especially those that were being picked up when we were not in full session. So the estimated loss is looking to be somewhere in the $125,000 range at the moment. So what we were planning to do is offset that with some ESSER funds, and we can offset that current year loss so that we maintain the cash balance that was in the food service fund at the beginning of the year. So Steve, we can have some discussions about that as a use of the ESSER funds, but it is allowable because it's a continuation of operations.
I felt like we went through this last month and there was a reserve or a pretty healthy cash balance in the food service account.
Yeah, we started out the year with about 340,000. We'll end up the year with about 280, I believe. Sorry, 340 to about say 200,000. So the idea was we would offset that loss and bump the balance up to the beginning of year level. It's not actually necessary because we still will have a positive cash balance in the fund.
If I have to choose between building back a cash balance in the food service fund or hiring math teachers or doing a project at one of our buildings to improve the safety or success of physical structure, I would prefer the latter. I don't know how my colleagues feel, but that money sitting in a food service fund gives us no return on that investment.
Mm-hmm. The cash, it is true. Okay, food service does not necessarily yield a return. It had in previous years in terms of being profitable, but the cash is actually sitting in some type of invested account, right? It's not sitting in like a no interest bearing account.
I'm in a programmatic.
Correct.
A return to our students, a return to our teachers, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Sorry, I didn't specify that.
Okay.
Hey, I just want to, and I know, Mike, there was a lady, her name was Danielle something, that had emailed me, and she was actually a consultant dealing with the food programs and things of that nature. And she'll probably be contacting you because she was just asking about our food program, compliance issues, things of that nature. And that may fall in line with, she, may have an idea of like, this will better serve you if you do this with your overage or your positive balance of that kind of, because I didn't go into detail with her because it was way over my head. But
yeah, I believe I did see the email. I believe it is a person with a firm where we would outsource food service. I think it was Sodexo.
I don't know. I didn't know what the firm was. She was sending these emails and I was like, wait a minute,
Yeah, so there are several firms that, will come in and basically run your food service operation for you, and you pay them
Okay.
an amount per meal, that kind of thing as compensation. But that would be a big shift in terms of
Right.
taking it
Like I said,
out.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
And my only other question is like, when you have like all these encumbrances at the end of the year, and say there was a backlog of supplies and things of that nature, are you keeping them open, or are you like closing them and then redoing the whole process as far as within the current year appropriations?
We would close out ones that we are certain are not necessary. For those that, for example, we would have created a blanket purchase order in food service for purchase of food at one of the companies we use. Well, we didn't buy as much this year, and now we're towards the end of the year, so we're not going to use that PO. We will close that one and open up a new one in July. Same thing with, like fuel purchases for busing. But for anything where we expect the receipt of goods in the next fiscal year, we would need to keep that open, because the purchase order that the goods would be received on, if we closed it, will no longer exist. And we would not be able to match up the purchase and the receipt of goods and payments. So to the extent we know that something can be closed, we close it. If there's a question, it stays open.
Right. Oh, I understand.
And we're in contact with the buildings and secretaries and people to basically, review that activity. I think most of them are gone at this point, but that would have taken place.
Okay.
So again, final estimated resources are trued up. Final appropriations, increases and decreases to reflect actual expenditures versus appropriated amounts. And appropriations are limited. So, you cannot appropriate more than the amount of resources you have. And that the amount of resources basically is your beginning cash plus any carryover encumbrances. So if you had a PO open from the prior year that carried over, that's considered spendable item in the current year, plus any cash receipts. So that beginning cash was 1,000, carryover encumbrance was 100, estimated resources receipts were 1,000 for actual. That means appropriations cannot exceed $2,100 because you don't have enough money to appropriate. So that's an exercise we go through to make sure we're within limits. And then the temporary appropriations for next year, there's an October 1st deadline to actually approve the permanent appropriations. That's set in the code. So we typically approve those each September at the September board meeting. So it gives us a month or two to finalize all the budgets, come up with the estimates, and determine what the final appropriations will be. So the temporaries typically are 25 to 30% or so of what you expect the year might be based on current year expenditures. Current year was a bit of an anomaly, so you need to maybe look back an additional year to kind of come up with a more reasonable estimate for some of the line items.
Okay.
So just to refresh me, the meeting we have scheduled for June 29th is to approve the temporary appropriations, correct?
Yes, that would be the last item to approve. It also would have final appropriations for each of the funds.
Oh, right. Okay.
Final estimated resources or final resources, which technically don't need to be approved, but usually I historically have had those approved by the board. I'd have to think back to see if I did that last fiscal year when we closed out. But certainly we need to chew up all the appropriations and have the temporaries in place in order to operate beginning July 1st. And also to approve any transfers or advances.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Looks like I think Steve, you wanted to add something to this. I think you're on mute.
I'll promise I'll be quick. We had a steering committee meeting last night for phase two, and we meet every Tuesday, the first Tuesday of every month. And I wanted to just announce that our designs are very close. They're being costed out at the elementary level. And what we're trying to do is do the academic portions of those buildings first, because right now there's a supply chain issue with structural steel to do bigger spaces. And our principals are going to go over, so both Kathy and Kristen are going to go over those designs with their staff in a virtual meeting on Friday. I also wanted to just let you know that today we had interviews with 2 insurance companies to consider, insurance that is owner-controlled insurance program. And there are a lot of good aspects to it. It avails us more insurance and can protect us more, but it also, yeah.
What type of insurance are you speaking of?
So
Health insurance, property
oh.
insurance?
So it's general liability insurance and it's workman's comp insurance that we're looking at. And we don't have to do both. We can do them both combined. I just wanted to kind of put it on your radar. We're still studying it and we'll follow up with you. But basically, the way it works is, and Daphne, you know way more about insurance than I do, but the way it works is that every contractor, subcontractor has their own insurance. And if there is a claim or there's something that goes awry, it becomes a very legally messy process. So if we buy owner-controlled insurance, the theory is, and there's auditors that work for the company that go through this, is the contractors, when they give a bid for a project, they exclude the insurance costs and it's picked up by the owner-controlled insurance. So there's a break-even point that, we know that Upper Arlington reached and others have done on a big project like ours. It's something we should consider. I think, I have some information,
So this is the builder's risk policy.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not our district general liability or workers' comp.
No,
all
it's
right.
it's for
there's
the
a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, it's for the 200 million plus project is what it's for. And it covers workman's comp and general liability. So we're considering it. It's something that, we're learning about and it could be a good thing for us. The other thing is Bricker and Eckler is working with Turner. We're negotiating a contract to have them become our owner's rep. Our selection committee chose them out of as being first among a number of other firms. And then the last thing, we had a great day on the 13th. So Sunday, we had about 250 people come through, community members, many of whom had raised their kids and just wanted to see the new building. And so we had about 8 tours of around 20 to 30 people on Sunday afternoon. So that was a lot of fun.
Can I ask a question about the owner's rep? Is that a recommendation that comes to the board for a board vote?
Yeah, it will. It will. Yeah, I mean, it'll be a well, I think, I'm getting ahead of myself. I think there's going to be a resolution like there was for the architect to negotiate a contract. So they haven't begun that yet.
Okay. That was confusing.
I got ahead of myself. They will be as soon as, if you guys approve the resolution to move forward, they will be. So any questions about any of that? Okay.
Does anyone have anything else?
Just really quickly, because Steve's update reminded me, I think that we had talked about as a board that we would make sure that we had an agenda item on our finance committee agenda meetings for an update about the projects. It didn't even cross my mind until Steve started talking. But if whoever is doing those agendas, I don't know if it's Kimberly or whoever, can we make sure that that's a regular
That's a
agenda?
standard thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I prepare the agenda and send it to Kimberly, so I'll make sure that's on every agenda.
Okay, it should, I think we talked about it being on there every month, that we were going to use finance committee as a way to update.
I got a question. You know how like we get all the emails as far as the dates and stuff like that, and with your availability and stuff like that. When Amy had sent out something, you know, it was some kind of Outlook calendar, and it had all these dates. You went in and put a check mark for the times of your availability. So then they went back and said, everyone, which day, which time is everyone available, and that's how they scheduled their meetings. Because now, where we get like 3 and 4, emails, and you're like, okay, which one is, and trying to follow it. It's just kind of hard to follow. So I didn't know if there's a way. I don't know if it's an Outlook calendar scheduler or something, but when she did it, it was like everyone was on it, and it had the days that were available, and you put your time available within those days. You put X's.
Oh,
Throughout that whole process.
so you like the process you used?
Yeah, because it was simple. I mean, because then you got like once you clicked on that link and you put in, I'm available here, you can look at the other people that's you want in that meeting.
Yeah.
Not available here. And then what you do is at the end of the day, you go back and say, everyone is available at 3:00 on Wednesday.
Yeah.
We're going to schedule a meeting.
Yeah.
Versus like getting it sent back out saying, well, this person's available.
And you got to answer another email. Yeah. We can look into that.
And I don't know what she used because, I'm not a techie person, but I was just saying, I get the emails. I'm like, okay, which one is this, and clicking there. So,
yeah. Yeah. We can look into that. That's a good idea.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions, concerns, gripes? Yeah, that's good. All right.
Gonna make the meeting longer, Brian.
I know I'm trying to get it to 7:30. What are you talking about? All right. Well, it's 7:27, and I guess we're done.
All right.
Everyone have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.